AH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and today I'm going to be talking about three of the most overplayed cards in the format, which is a subject that, of course, I'm going to get a lot of pushback on whenever you talk about a card that everyone's playing and you talk about maybe it shouldn't be played so much. Obviously, a lot of people that are playing that card are going to push back on it. That's completely fine. This is my opinion. I have a particular strategy when it comes to building commander decks. Now, I'm doing this video specifically right now for a reason. All three cards that I'm talking about today are card draw effects, essentially, okay? And I'm going to be doing a video coming up right away talking about card draw in general in the format. And I thought I don't want to spend too much time on the cards that you shouldn't be putting in your deck as far as card draw options go. So I thought I would tackle that issue more so here. And three cards specifically that see a ton of play in the format. I see them all the time. I see them in my patrons decks when I do my Deck Doctor videos. I see them all over the place, and I just don't think they're great as a card draw option. And I will get more specifically into it with each card. Okay, so let's talk about the first card. And it is Village Rites. I'm sure everyone's very familiar with it. 1 black mana instant as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards. So this is currently in 123,000 decks on EDHREC. That's a lot. It's one of the most popular cards in the format. And, you know, with all of these cards, there's a very similar theme. These cards are all very similar. I'm just talking about them each individually, but they all have a whole lot in common. And the thing they have in common is their card draw, of course. They're cheap. They're all instant speed, and they are all doing a very specific thing. So, of course, this one is sacrificing a creature. And the thing that I don't love about cards like this, and why I'm talking about all three of them today, is because as a card draw option, they're not great. So as a card draw option, this is not very good. Now, if you're using it for the sacrifice effect, then it is pretty good, right? That's where I would play this card. I'm going to play this card in a deck where I want to be sacrificing stuff. Maybe I want to be sacrificing creatures. Maybe I want to be sacrificing my commander. As I've said a few times before when I've talked about this card, I like this card in a deck where I have a commander with a dies trigger, right? This is a 1 mana instant speed sack outlet, and you get the nice advantage of drawing 2 cards. So in an Alenda deck, for example, I would like to see this card in an Alenda deck. Sure, if I was making an Alenda deck, I might play this card. Now, as I'm going to talk about in another video, I'm making a whole bunch of videos here that are all sort of connected. In another video, I'm going to talk about how I would prefer something to be in permanent form rather than, you know, having the one shot in my hand, because obviously if I want to be doing something in my deck, I probably want to be doing it over and over and over again rather than just doing it the one time, right? That's another thing that I have against cards like this when it comes to card draw is the one-shot effects I don't love. So a Vampiric Rites, for example, is a card that I do like. You got to pay the 2 mana, but it's on the battlefield so that you can use it again the next time and the next time and the next time. You know, I prefer effects like that if you're looking for a sack outlet, right? I'm not saying it's better as a card draw option necessarily, but if you're looking for a sack outlet. As a sack outlet, this is okay. It's good because it's instant speed, and if you have that commander like Alenda that your opponent is going to exile, maybe they cast a Swords to Plowshares or a Farewell, all that hard work you put into putting those counters on your commanders, you don't want to lose it. So in response, 1 mana, I sacrifice my Alenda and I, you know, get my tokens. I guess if they're casting a Farewell, you're pretty much screwed anyway, but targeted removal, right? Obviously, this is going to save against exile targeted removal, and Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile are 2 of the most popular removal spells in the entire format. That's where I like a card like this. I like a card like this in a deck where you have a commander with a dies trigger, particularly, or if you're just in a sacrifice theme in general. As a card draw option, right? That's the general theme of this video. As a card draw option, this isn't good at all, right? This is 0 card advantage, right? This is I sacrifice a creature, I'm casting this spell, and then I'm drawing 2 cards. That's a 2 card for 2 card trade-off. You're not up anything. So right away, I have a situation where I'm not really up anything. Again, if you want to be sacrificing creatures, then you're kind of up, but you're even not up that much. You're only up really 1 card. Furthermore, and this will play into the other cards as well, I want my card draws to have some impact. You know, we have a format here where you have a singleton format with 99 cards. There is so many fantastic, powerful, awesome cards you could be putting in your deck, and you're putting this very low impact card in your deck. This is a very low impact card in my opinion. Drawing 2 cards is not that big of a deal in a commander game, right? Especially if you have to sacrifice a creature. Keep in mind, always with all of these cards, right? We have something called a cantrip in Magic, right? That is a, that's lingo, magic lingo. It's not an actual magic term. A cantrip is a card that you cast that then replaces itself with it has draw a card as the resolution of the effect. So it replaces itself. So if you had 5 cards in hand, you cast that card, you get some effect, like you give a creature haste or something, then you draw a card. So now you still have the same amount of cards in your hand. That's called a cantrip effect. That's what essentially this is. Now, this is not so much that case as the other 2 are. This one, you actually are up a card in hand, but you're down a creature. So, again, card advantage wise, it's a 2 for 2. You are actually up a card in hand. So again, if you're in a situation where you actually want to sacrifice creatures where it actually benefits you, I think this is a pretty good effect. But I think it's probably in more decks than it should be. Even more the case is Thrill of Possibility. This is one of those cards that, again, just like with Village Rites, it comes out in a set. It doesn't get any buzz at all because it's just not really doing a whole lot. And then you end up seeing it in over 125,000 decks on EDHREC, and you're like, what happened here? So, I mean, if you haven't seen it before, 1 in a red, instant as an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards. So for me, this is even worse than Village Rites. It costs 2 mana, so it's even more expensive. At least Village Rites costs just 1 mana. This, again, there is no sacrifice a creature here part. There is the discard a card part. So that's where this is slightly different. Has the exact same effect of you drawing 2 cards. Once again, if you are in a discard theme where you want to be discarding things, this is a decent fit. I am playing this card in my Bralin deck. This is the one card out of these 3 that I'm actually playing because I want to be discarding stuff. If you want to be discarding stuff, the discard, instead of becoming a disadvantage, now becomes an advantage. So now this is 2 mana instant speed, draw 2 cards, which is pretty good, and you get the advantage of discarding a card. So now this becomes a upside rather than a downside, the discard part, right? If you're in a discard, like I'm discarding triggers, that kind of stuff, like I do in my Bralin deck, or if you're in a, I want to chuck an anger in my graveyard, or I want to chuck a giant creature in my graveyard that I can recur, right? That's what I mean by a discard theme. If you're not doing any of that, and I would imagine there are not 125,000 decks that are doing that, this is not great. This is bad card advantage, okay? The evaluation of this card for me is if I'm in a discard theme, it's pretty good because the drawback now becomes an upside. And again, if people are using this as a card draw option, that's where I have an issue with it. It's not a good card draw option at all because you are casting your Thrill of Possibility and you're discarding a card and you're drawing 2 cards, so you've just replaced the cards you've gotten rid of. If you had 7 cards in your hand, you cast your Thrill of Possibility, you now have 7 cards in hand. Card advantage 0, once again, unless you're in a discard theme. I don't think there's that many decks that are I just don't think there's 125,000 decks that are in a discard theme or maybe a recursion theme in red. Maybe red-black. I don't think so. I think a lot of people are just using this as a draw option, and it's not a very good one at all. If you're not in a discard theme, or if you don't want to be putting stuff in your graveyard, I don't think you should be playing this card. I really don't, especially with we think about all the great cards we've been getting recently, guys. Like last year, so far this year already, you could be putting those cards in your deck instead of this not very good draw spell. That's my opinion on it anyway. But let's move on to the last one, which is Brainstorm. And this is probably the king of this sort of mentality that people have. And this card is just very deceptive. It looks really good, okay? If you haven't seen it before, 1 blue mana instant, draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. This is another card I've talked about quite a bit on my channel. And again, these cards are all very similar. Instant speed, draw spells. And I'm talking about them specifically in this video because I think people are using them for card draw option, okay? All of them have the alternate use of, if I want to be sacrificing creatures, then it's probably okay. If I want to be discarding cards, then it's probably okay. For Brainstorm, if I want to be getting draw triggers, because this is 1 mana draw 3 cards, sort of. If I want to be getting draw triggers, this is good. Or if I want to be putting stuff on top of my library, and of course there's a few decks that play off the top of your library, it's also really good. That's where I would play this card. Not really anywhere else. I would never ever play this as a draw spell. This is currently in over 300,000 decks on EDHREC. This is maybe the most overplayed card in the entire format, in my opinion. It's a terrible draw spell if that's what you're playing it for. There's like a psychology to this, okay? It feels like you're doing a lot. It feels like you're doing a lot. You're drawing 3 cards for 1 mana, but at the end of the day, you're up nothing, right? Just like with the other 2 cards, this is 0 card advantage, right? What this is I draw 3 cards. Again, keep in mind your Brainstorm is in your hand. So you're casting your Brainstorm. Say you have 7 cards in hand. You cast your Brainstorm. Now you have 6. You draw three cards. So you're up to 9. Then you put 2 on top of your library. Now you're back to 7. You're right exactly where you started. Now, a lot of people will say, and a lot of people like this card for the reason that it gets played in Legacy. This is a powerhouse in Legacy. And, you know, I think a lot of stuff like cards like this, and I would imagine maybe I haven't played Modern in a long time, but maybe Thrill of Possibility and Village Rites get played a lot in other formats, like maybe Modern, maybe. Because in those formats, doing those little intricacies make a big difference, whereas in Commander I don't think they do at all. And there's a couple other cards that I can think of that I think have played way too much, and I didn't want to go too deep on this, that are doing something similar where they are really good in Modern. In fact, they're banned in Modern because they're really good in Modern, and in Commander I just don't think they're impactful enough to ever play. Brainstorm is the case for me. Like 300,000 is that is a very popular card in the format for something that is going to do almost nothing in most Commander decks, right? Again, if you want the draw triggers, like you are playing like a Niv Mizzet deck or something, you know, you want the draw triggers, or you want to draw your 2nd card each turn, something like that, it's a good card. If you want to be putting stuff on top of your library, obviously, it's one of the best cards ever for doing that. Other than that, if you're just putting this in your deck to draw cards, it's terrible, okay? Putting this in your deck to maybe shuffle away cards that you don't want can work. It works a lot better in like Legacy. That's where people use this card in Legacy, is they have tons of fetch lands, right, in their decks, and they cast this, put 2 cards on their library that they don't really want, and then crack their fetch and shuffle them away so they don't have to draw into them. That scenario doesn't work nearly as good in Commander. Not nearly as good. First of all, you're not playing nearly enough fetches. I mean, what are the chances you actually have the fetch when you're doing the Brainstorm thing? I mean, again, I guess if you're in a deck where you are shuffling your library lots, then Brainstorm might be good that way. It's still not that impactful. Again, we're in a singleton format. If you're playing Legacy and I draw 2 of the same card and I only need 1, I shuffle the other one away. That's never going to happen in Commander because you don't have 2 of the same card in your deck. Everything is different, you know, and I know you can get into the situation where I got 3 board wipes in my deck and it just so happens I get into the really rare scenario where I draw 2 of them and I don't need, you know, 1 is good enough. Sure, that can happen. Now I'm relying on the situation of I got to have my Brainstorm. So I have my 2 board wipes in my deck, and then I also have to draw my Brainstorm, and then I also have to have a fetch land that I can crack to shuffle it away. Like that is Dreamland scenario, right? The chances that ever happens is exceedingly rare. The main reason why I'm talking about this card and these other 2 cards as well is because I just don't think they're good draw options, okay? If you're looking for draw options, and again, I'm going to be making a video about drawing cards in Commander, and I didn't want to spend too much time on these 3 cards and cards like them, so that's why I wanted to make this video first so I can direct people, you know, in this direction if they want to see more of my thoughts on it. As a card draw option, as a pure, I just need card draw in my deck, right? I'm putting my deck together and you need card draw in your deck. That's why I am making the video about card draw. I talked about this in my 6 things that every Commander deck needs video. You need card draw in your deck. So if I'm putting my deck together and I need card draw, you should not be going after these cards first. I almost don't think they're card draw at all because they are all either 1-for-1s or 2-for-2s. That, you know, you're not up anything as actual card. Like, what actually is card draw? Unless you just want card draw triggers in your deck, card draw is card advantage. I had less cards in my hand. Now I have more cards in my hand. That's what card draw actually is. It's card advantage. This is not card advantage. None of these cards are card advantage. You're not up anything. I guess Village Rites would be the exception where, you know, sacrificing the creature actually does net you an extra card in hand. So I guess of these 3, that would be the one that is maybe the least problematic there. Thrill of Possibility and Brainstorm are 100% not card advantage. You end up with the exact same amount of cards in hand that you did before. keep that in mind. Again, I think a lot of people will just go to these cards for one, because they get played a lot in other formats. So if you play, Legacy a lot, and now you're making a Commander deck, you're like, hey, Brainstorm's fantastic in Legacy. I'm going to put it in my Commander deck too. It's just not very impactful at all. It has almost no impact on the game. Again, unless you want to be stacking the top of your library, right? So I think there's a little bit of that. I think there also is a little bit of, hey, Brainstorm is this iconic card in the history of the game that everyone considers to be powerful, so I should put it in my deck. That happens a lot in Commander, I find, where people just play cards that they're not able to play them in other formats. So Commander is the format we get to play these cards. So Brainstorm is this really great card. I'm going to put it in my deck. Brainstorm is for sure the card that is the most guilty for doing this, where you feel like you're doing a lot. For 1 mana, I get to draw 3 cards. That feels like I'm doing a lot, but really you're not, because at the end of the day, you're up nothing. And likely in most scenarios, the cards you just put back on top of your library, you're going to just end up drawing them again. And 300,000 decks is a lot. Probably one of the most overplayed cards in the entire format, in my opinion. Maybe the most overplayed card in the entire format. Again, with any of these 3 cards, if you are in those specific scenarios, right? If you're in a sacrifice theme, Village Rites actually probably is pretty good. If you're in a discard theme, Thrill of Possibility is probably great. And with Brainstorm, if you want draw triggers or you want to be stacking the top of your library, it's fantastic. It's probably one of the best spells all time for that. Other than that, I think these cards see way too much play in the format. And again, I wanted to tackle these 3 specific cards because I'm going to be making a video about card draw in general. I didn't want to spend all the time talking about here's the card draw spells you shouldn't be putting in. So now I can direct people to this video when I do that. I know I'm going to get a little pushback on that. That's fine. Everyone has their opinion about it. For me, I like my card draw spells to be impactful. And I will also have a little addendum here about, I'm talking about casual Commander, guys. I know a lot of these cards are probably better in a quicker version of Commander, let's call it, whether it be CEDH or the people that, for them, casual Commander ends on turn 5. For me, it doesn't. Those people, having a really low mana curve is more important. Switching out cards really quickly for them is a lot more important. For me, a casual Commander game is 8 to 10 turns. So cards like this are not very impactful. And if I draw Brainstorm off the top of my library on turn 8, I'm going to be like, that's not very good. Like I get to dig 3 deep into my library, I guess. So maybe there's a chance I actually hit a card I want. But other than that, again, you're in the situation where I put 2 cards back on top of my library and then I have to draw those cards for the next 2 turns. So it's almost like depressing because the next 2 cards you're going to be drawing are cards that you don't want at all. It does play into it a lot. I know a lot of people who play in those more high-powered casual circles. Probably for them, these cards they're cheap, they're instant speed, they're really fast. It feels like you can get a lot done a lot quicker. But as far as just being impactful, they're not really impactful at all. Right? They're very minimal impact and pretty much no card advantage at all. That's why I don't love them specifically as card draw options, right? I'm talking about as a card draw option, I don't think any 3 of these are really that great, unless you are in that specific theme. All right, let me know what you think in the comments below. I know there's going to be a lot of people disagreeing with me, obviously, because these cards are all really popular in the format. But hopefully I have maybe convinced a few people to steer away from them. You guys let me know what you think, but that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.